So in the last lecture module, we saw Descartes trying to come up with a means of recreating his knowledge edifice, that is specifically his knowledge of the objects of the external world. And to do so, he has introduced this positive version of his principle of justification that tells him when he can assent to his judgments, that is, when he can believe things on the basis of his experiences. And in this way, it's contrasted with that negative version we saw in Meditation 1. He finds two difficulties with it. On the one hand, he thinks that these positive principle, which says that his clear and distinct perceptions, his judgments that he makes with certainty are true, can be undermined by the evil demon hypothesis. He nevertheless offers up a justification for that positive principle that is more pragmatic in nature, essentially saying that he has no means of seeing that the clear and distinct perceptions that he experiences aren't true, that would be as reliable as the clear and distinct perceptions themselves, and hence there is no other epistemic authority that could undermine it within his cognitive repertoire. With regard to judgments about external objects, he notes, well, the natural light doesn't help me here because none of my judgments about the causes of my sensory experiences comes from the natural light, is so clear and distinct as to be undoubtable. And hence the evil demon argument demolished his knowledge of the external world. So what Descartes needs to do, he thinks, is to come up with some means of guaranteeing that those judgments are in fact likely to be true, that they are good, connecting his sensory experiences to the objects of the external world. And the mechanism that he has for that is to prove the existence of God, a beneficent deity who is no deceiver. The idea being that if there is an all-powerful, all-knowing, but omnibenevolent deity, that deity would never allow him to be deceived, and hence his judgments about his sensory experiences, when made in accordance with that positive principle, or at least as close as he possibly can, are epistemically meritorious because the deity wouldn't allow him to use that faculty in a way that would lead him into error, because that would be evil. So in the third meditation, Descartes gives us the first of two proofs in the meditations of God's existence. He says, now it is manifest by the natural light that there must be at least as much reality in the efficient and total cause as in its effect. Now we saw that little lava lamp. That's not the natural light. That's not the natural light either. Recall, the natural light is those judgments that are clear and distinct, that are undoubtable, such that he finds them to be trustworthy, and he has no other kind of judgment, no other thing in his cognitive repertoire that could undermine that, which is equally reliable. So our first premise then, delivered to us by our clear and distinct judgment, is that there must be at least as much reality in the efficient and total cause of something as in its effect. So in other words, if I have a ball that gets accelerated by a collision, there must be at least as much momentum in the thing that hit that ball and started its acceleration as the ball itself will get. Premise 2. By the name God, I understand a substance that is infinite, eternal, and immutable, independent, all-knowing, and all-powerful, and by which I myself and everything else, if anything else does exist, have been created. So He says, I've got this idea of a deity. And this idea is the idea of a infinite, immutable substance that is independent, all-knowing, all-powerful, the creator of all that exists. Now, these characteristics are such that the more diligently I attend to them, the less do they appear capable of proceeding from me alone. So he says, I can't be the cause of this idea that I have of a deity because I am not infinite. I am not independent. I am not all-knowing, and I am not all-powerful. And therefore, I could not be the efficient cause of that idea because I lack the powers that I associate with the idea. Therefore, we must conclude that God, an entity, corresponds to that idea, is the cause of that idea, and that that entity necessarily exists. So God then is going to serve as the guarantor of the veridicality of Descartes' judgments when it comes to his judgments about his sensory experiences, objects in the external world. And so he says, I know that it is impossible for him ever to deceive me. Fraud and deception always contain imperfection and therefore can't be among God's desires. So this all-knowing, all-powerful, omnibenevolent deity couldn't possibly cause me to fall into fraud or deception.